Thank you. Thank you very much, Chris. Thank you. That's a big build-up. No, it's really, really good for me. Great to be here because I suppose my introduction to this group was only a few months ago, really. Well, about 6 months ago. I met Jerome Lewis, who a lot of you would know. I was doing a talk for a charity event about my work, and I was on first, and then Jerome came on after me. And we'd never met each other, and we did the same talk, it seemed to be. Very odd. And there was this parallel in terms of our inquiry, which seems kind of uncanny. So we hooked up and we talked a lot. And he told me about this group, and I started to come. And it was a revelation, this group, to me. And it feels odd now that I'd never really looked much at anthropology, although very interested in indigenous culture particularly, but I'd never really looked at anthropology as a discipline. And it's in so many ways it's a parallel to what artists do. So I feel like I've found this new discipline, which I'm very excited about. So it's opened up a whole new area for me, which is great. So probably I should start with where I started with, and this is pretty much going to be a straight talk.
I thought it was going to be a live show.
Yeah, well, it's a live show. I'm showing some films and video. I might do a little bit of performance, just as a demonstration. So I trained a long time as an artist from sort of 87, from 1987 for about 9 years. I trained as an artist. And then I was practicing as an artist here in London, and then after about 5 years I gave up. And I was doing quite well, I was selling work, having exhibitions, but what I'd been trained for to be an artist seemed to have absolutely no relevance to the real world. And I'd been trained in this discipline of contemporary fine art, which seemed self-serving and obsessed with itself in that sense. And for me, I kind of soon realised, actually, once I was out of that institutional context, I wasn't actually very interested in art. And I think that's, whenever I talk to students, I think so many people are very interested in art and obsessed with art, so they become artists to make art. And for me, if I go into the studio to make art, that just seemed like a cul-de-sac. And once I'd realised this, I gave up for about 2 years, and I moved to a place near Wales, and I lived in this quite rural area, and I did some building work, and just started to do things that I really have always enjoyed, which was basically studying nature and my ongoing relationship with nature. And then, incidentally, because of that fascination and that obsession, I started to take photographs and drawing and filming things. And the art came through that relationship indirectly. So the art wasn't the point. The point was to investigate this relationship with nature. And the side effect, maybe I'll show it now and again, but this was this real investigation. I had a kind of purpose there. So this was one of my first photographs of that period, and it was really acknowledgement of my utter my utter romanticism, my desperation. And a acknowledgement for myself, really, how that has defined my own perception of self in this context of using this context of nature, and the realization that I'm a cultured person. There is no escape from that enculturation, and that seemed to be one of the primary purposes of going into nature, to shed myself of that enculturation. So I started to really try and analyse what it was to be in nature, and not only because I was obsessed with nature, but because nature seemed so clearly a mirror for me. It seemed to be a way of shouting back at myself, to see myself as someone, as a filter, really, of how culture has affected me, how I am defined as a person in this time and in this very rational and pragmatic society we live in. So this is another early photograph. This is a kind of strategy I started to develop quite soon, which I sort of called Becoming Animal. And it was this very extreme romanticism, really. It's like pushing this idea of wanting to be and close the gap with nature, but do it in a very kind of extreme way. So in a way, not just to find that limit of where my humanness ended and where the animal started. So this is me up a tree, being a goshawk, which is quite a rare bird. And this is up in a forest called Grisdale in northwest England. And I started all these this is me as a red fox, dressed up in a red boiler suit with red socks and red gloves. And it's taking that idea of becoming very, very literally and very sort of being very forthright about it. It's a futile, pathetic attempt, but somewhere along the line, I believe that there are degrees to which you could become something other than human, or even perhaps experience the edges of what that might mean. And part of this motivation to do this was a reaction to Thomas Nagel's essay, What Is It Like to Be a Bat? Where he really laid out the territory, which was saying, well, we have utterly different sensory modalities. There's no way we can understand or start to know what it is like to be something else. And all of my experience in the natural world, or in anything, shouted, no, that's not true. There are degrees. It's not a clear-cut line. I am here. I'm feeling quite warm. I can feel light coming in my eyes. There's not much of a breeze. Just those things in itself seemed like quite a big basis to say I've got something. I know what it is like to be a fox if that was sitting here. But I tried to push that and see how far I could take it. So I started looking at sort of more unnatural environments. This is me as a iron prominent, which is a moth. And I basically did a whole series where I was becoming all the British moths, and there's thousands of them. So this is me with shaving foam on. And there's something about me, that's this interior experience. Me actually, I do believe I am, at some level, this moth. And in a way, it's a challenge to you to maybe step into that, or even start to negotiate my belief somehow. This is another moth. This is a comma butterfly. That's me with sugar on. This is me with dough, just bread, just flour and water. This is a mayfly. So there's all sorts of sort of quite experiential experiments, really, which I've found if I documented them, I could not only have this experience, which is very subjective, but afterwards I'd have this objective thing that I could study. This is me as a common slug, and that's a leopard slug. That's just cotton wool. There's something very random about these materials. I had an assistant put them on me. There's no control over them, and they made their own forms in a way. So it was about me not really having control over that. And I started to get into this sort of the other side of my relationship with animals, which was very empirical and very scientific. I was very interested in scientific inquiry. This is a running grey wolf, and it's a very accurate replication of a running grey wolf. You can see how it's bounding, it's sort of almost leaping, and its tail is riding behind it. It's quite high, and its ears are up, and its nose is out front, and it's going hell for leather. So in a way, that's as accurate as I possibly could make it. That is exactly the dimensions of that grey fox, and grey wolf, and pretty much the same colour as the grey wolf. So it's in one way it fits exactly in the way that we name animals, we study animals, we define animals. So that in a way seems to be as accurate a reflection of my relationship with this grey wolf as a photograph or another representation. So it's kind of exploring kind of how culture mediates all these things. As Chris mentioned, I did a residency on the Galapagos Islands, and that was an amazing place because there seemed to be a war, pretty much a war on this main island where people live, between the conservationists and the scientists. And nowhere have I seen a bigger divide between people who are, they're both really interested in nature, but some people want to live in it and use it, and some people want to conserve it and study it. So it's a massive divide, so much so that they're physically fighting and causing damage to each other's houses. I don't think the scientists were fighting. I think the residents on the island were mainly, because the scientists were defining how people lived on the island to such an extent that they weren't allowed to grow some plants, unindigenous things weren't allowed, there was a control on fishing. And if they were going to keep this environment pristine, that's exactly what they had to do. But it meant that it was very hard for people to live there. So I thought, how can I intervene in this as an artist? How can I use my animal becoming skills in a way? So I made this costume, which is a blue-footed booby, which is an iconic species of the island. And there was a local radio station. There's only about, I think there's about 40,000 people in the Galapagos, and they all pretty much live on one island. And they've got a little family-run TV studio. And I went there and said, can I do a news report for you as the blue-footed booby? So they amazingly agreed. So this is my news report, which got aired for their news station.
8 de la noche, 26 minutos, amigos. Queremos presentarles a continuación una nota importante. El piquero patas azules es una de las especies más emblemáticas de Galápagos, está de visita en nuestras islas de una manera poco usual. Nos ha visitado este informativo, este medio de comunicación, para darnos a conocer cuál es el criterio de cómo vivimos los seres humanos.
Aclaremos algo. Nuestro nombre es Bobo, que en español es como le dicen a la gente estúpida. En inglés, boobies significa pechos. ¿Soy un idiota pecho volador para ustedes? Somos superiores a ustedes, volando por supuesto, nadando, buceando, mirando, danzando y cortejeando, por nombrar algunas cosas. Ustedes son criaturas extrañas y graciosas, con bellas marcas. Algunos de ustedes se ven diferentes a nosotros. ¿Están ordenados según la variedad de su plumaje? ¿Son estas personas especies aparte? Algunos de ustedes tienen territorios más extensos que otros. ¿Por qué es así? ¿Es porque algunos de ustedes son más grandes que otros? No entiendo. ¿Mascotas? Nos honran con el símbolo de un ave volando. Su cola enterrada, alas expandidas y el pico hacia el cielo. Yo pienso que a algunos de ustedes no les agrada ser humanos, pero no son buenos para otra cosa. Si fuesen otro animal, no sobrevivirían, puesto que han perdido su instinto. Gente viene a vernos desde lejos. Somos famosos. ¿Por qué nadie viene a esta isla para verlos a ustedes? Les tengo algunas sugerencias. Ustedes alimentan a sus bebés leche y después comida con cuchara. ¿Puedo sugerir vómito? Es fácil de digerir y no hay que lavar después. Puedo también sugerir que dejen su propia caca alrededor del perímetro de sus viviendas, así evitarán intrusos. Nosotros somos similares a ustedes. Somos fieles a nuestras esposas, igual que ustedes. Salimos para proveer a nuestros pequeños y nos turnamos con nuestras esposas para cuidar a nuestros bebés. En conclusión, ustedes son parásitos. Eso es fácil para un animal como yo de entender. Pero lo que yo no entiendo es por qué han colonizado esta isla, que no tiene agua recomendable ni abastecimiento de comida. No promete sobrevivencia, porque ustedes encuentran difícil adaptarse a las condiciones locales. Esta es una forma precaria de existir. De todas maneras, no se preocupen, no están en peligro. He visto muchos otros como ustedes en otras tierras. Si todos mueren, estarán bien. Más humanos arribarán e iniciarán una nueva colonia de apareamiento. Gracias por no comerme.
Sin duda alguna, un singular y muy bonito tema el que nos ha dado nuestro amigo el día de hoy.
So in a way, I found like I could say things maybe that the scientists couldn't say and the politicians couldn't say. I felt like there was a place for me as an artist there to really confront those quite difficult questions in a way that's quite entertaining and strangely inclusive. So yeah, that sort of desire to be kind of almost test my abilities to become animal, or in that way to imagine a different sense of being and how useful that is. Wanting to test that seemed very sort of against the art that I'd experienced before, and that became quite an important thing for me, just to have something at stake, I suppose, in that process. So this is one of the early performances I did with a group of women in Liverpool, and I was doing a residency in the block of flats that they were living in, and they were. Have I got it here? Yes, I should have. And they were being evicted from this block of flats, and I thought, well, where else has this becoming animal used in history? Where else has it been used in society? And I looked at the whole shamanic tradition really, and looked at the role of the shaman and how the shaman worked for the community and tried to find information for the community, and used these becoming animal skills really. So I thought, well, maybe could my skills be transferable in this sort of way, in a quite a sort of naive way. I think really I approached this. And so I approached these women and said, do you have a question you need to ask that you can't really find an answer for, something that's really upsetting you or is really important to you? And they came up with this question, and I attempted to answer this question by going into what, in a traditional sense, you'd call a spirit world, and look for some answers. So that's a very small part of the film. It goes on for quite a long time. There's a lot of scepticism there in the audience, as you could tell. But what happens after a while is, and I haven't got time to show you, but I think because of my, I'm doing this very sincerely and very earnestly, and I'm basically going on this travelling in my imagination and seeing these birds and animals which I'm attempting to converse with, and looking for clues, really. And I come back and I tell them about what I'd seen. And at that point where I came back, I thought, I can't tell them about this bird I've seen. I mean, it's just ridiculous. They've asked me this really important question about, they said, who is our protector and what is it? I thought, okay, well, I saw this sparrowhawk and it had these strange wings, and these feathers were falling out, and they just couldn't combine, and when it tried to fly. Anyway, it's quite an elaborate thing about these sparrowhawk's wings. And then while I was telling it, I sort of started to realise that this was a bit like them. These feathers couldn't form this bird properly. It couldn't have any autonomy somehow. And then I told them about this, and then they started to say, well, we can't get anyone to join us. We can't get anyone, our group, people just keep leaving our group. No one will come in and join us. And then we started.
What was their group, by the way?
Their group was a residents' association. And they were they weren't campaigning to not be evicted, but they collected together to try and have some sort of voice in that process of eviction. And then they sort of said, well, you know, we're the protector. We're the group. We're our own protector. And we sort of together we came up with this quite amazing answer for them. So I didn't know what to expect when I did that. I mean, it was just a real experiment. But it felt like I went totally beyond myself, and they went beyond themselves. And we got to this point where something from the imagination, from my imagination, was a really important spark. And it inferred some sort of knowledge that maybe we did have, but we didn't have access to before. So I started to really think about the potency of this, and how this could be really, really powerful. This is a small clip of. I did a 4-year residency in the Elephant and Castle quite a few years ago now, before it's now being demolished, the Haygate estate, if you know it. And I lived on the estate for a while and spent time there and talked to the council and the developers. And I almost did this sort of huge consultation process that the council or the developers could never do, just to try and find out what people needed and how this whole community operated, and almost also to be able to have some way of giving the residents particularly a voice that wasn't necessarily a rational voice, but was more of an emotive and physical voice. So this is me sort of trying to understand the place quite physically, actually, not using sort of non-rational processes. And you'll see me do a performance at the end, which is the culmination of the 4 years, where I went on a journey, really, used that performance, and it was witnessed by the council, all the residents, and a lot of the Elephant and Castle. And then I went to the council and developers afterwards and told them my findings, which was I saw these birds and animals, and I told them about the specific value of these birds and what they represented for me. So I tried to turn this very physical research time and condense it into this performance that was witnessed, and then try to evoke some knowledge from that and impart that knowledge in a pragmatic way. So that's quite a long film. It's about an hour long, and it really just sort of maps out the whole process from when I started to meet the residents and spend time on the estate to this finale, which was this concert. And I suppose that the idea of really trying to, what I essentially saw as experiential knowledge, the idea of understanding and acquiring some sense of understanding through non-rational means, and then dispensing that knowledge and communicating that knowledge in a very rational and pragmatic way. That process really started to become very powerful for me. And I really wanted to test it. At the core of testing it was this idea that I had to utterly trust what I saw in my imagination, to the point where I couldn't question it. I just had to go with that and in a sort of totally unrehearsed and a very innocent way, just totally just go with that. And I think one of the hardest tests was this film I made in Israel.
Oh, yes.
Well, I went to Israel and I really wanted to test this in a very heightened political atmosphere. And at the time, Israel was in, always is in a horrible crisis with itself mainly. But I wanted to really test this with maybe someone who is very either influential or as a part to play somehow. So I went to see the mayor of the city of Holon. I got permission to see him, and I said, "Will you ask me a question that's important to you?" And he asked me a question really about violence and youth, and I sort of probed that question. I said, "What's that question about? What, is there something?" I sort of interrogated the question a bit. He said, "Well, yeah, they're our next leaders, and if they're violent, then we don't have any hope," sort of thing. So, he sort of likened it to the future of the crisis, and he wouldn't say. Anyway, he talked about the Palestinian-Israeli problem. So there was a question there about the future of Israel and its relationship to Palestine. So I did a ritual for him, which I will show you now, in his office. So I went on to talk to lots of different animals, and then I sat down with him and I told him what I'd seen, and at that point I had no understanding of how this related to the question at all, which is the interesting bit actually. It's the retelling of the story in a way that creates the links and the connections, and that's almost the creative bit in it all. So I started to tell him about how I'd seen this plover, and it was doing this activity, this behaviour that I knew what it was about. And basically, a plover is a small bird, well, a medium-sized bird that nests on the ground. I don't know if you know lapwings or grey plovers. Larks aren't quite plovers, but they're on the same habitat. So they nest on moorland usually, or on beaches sometimes, stony beaches. But the important thing is they're ground nesting birds. And often when they're nesting and a predator approaches, they will pretend to have a broken wing. And they'll sort of feign this broken wing and in order to lead you away from the nest. They'll make themselves an easy target. And I kept seeing in this journey, I kept seeing this plover and this broken wing. And I knew, and I was telling the mayor, I knew I wasn't a threat to this plover. I wasn't going to hurt this plover. I wasn't going to hurt the chicks. I wasn't interested in that. And it felt like the plover had no way of understanding whether I was a predator or not, or whether I was a risk or not. It would just see everyone as a risk. And almost had this default position of seeing everything as a threat. So I started to talk to him about this, and I sort of thought, oh, well, maybe that's sort of, maybe that's Israel a bit. and then I talked about a position of victim in a way, and how that gives you a sort of a position of moral superiority often, and it aids you to do things that you wouldn't do normally. Anyway, I talked about this at length, and maybe I inferred too much into it. Anyway, I should have just given him the story and let him infer meaning into it. But he said thank you very much, and he did say at the end he believed it wasn't a play. He did believe I actually went somewhere and saw it. So I feel like at least I had that kind of truth conveyed to him, which was important. So that was a sort of really testing that, and since then I've gone on to run a school really for people to learn how to do this. With me and collaborate in a way, and the most recent thing we did was it's called School of the Imagination, and it was with 6 members of the public who applied to go on this course that I was running, and we did this a couple of years ago, and we spent a week really learning really how to trust our imagination, really from the outset. What is the imagination? How can you actually get into your imagination? I was surprised that lots of people, when they close their eyes, I was saying, okay, you're all closing your eyes now, what do we all see? And lots of people didn't see anything. And they'd say, well, black. And I said, okay, now we're going to go on a journey and we're going to walk along, we're all on the street. And I'd say, well, what do you see? We're black. But I say, aren't you seeing anything? I said, well, I've got my eyes closed, I can't see anything. And that the whole concept of this other world that we do inhabit was anathema to people. And that was, I found that astonishing, because for all my life, that's been as significant a reality as this, and as important. And with this work, I think that's kind of what I'm trying to press home, is this idea that we need to give this world significance to access this knowledge that we have. So anyway, by the end of the week, they got really good at using their imagination and using physical imagination and thinking physically. You know, really taking apart the idea of thinking and what that is, and being conscious. So we took these skills out onto the street, and we answered questions for people on the street, and we answered questions for the local community who came in, and then we took it to City Hall and talked to some civil servants, I suppose they are there, and they had this question about health, and this is the health team at City Hall in London.
Our question is, if people know something is bad for their health, why do they carry on doing it?
Okay, I'll write that up. If people do something that's bad for...
If people know that something's bad for their health,
Yeah.
why do they keep on doing it?
And it's almost as though the question acknowledges that just information is not enough.
Yeah.
It's better than nothing, it's a beginning, but just the information doesn't seem to be quite enough.
Oh, yeah, I think that's always the case. Just because we know something's bad for our health doesn't mean that would never be enough. I mean, I think we all know lots of stuff.
Yeah.
You can find out anything that you want on the internet, on YouTube. You can know anything that you want to know. We know that knowledge doesn't change behaviour.
Okay, so the two women are the clients in a way. They're the part of the health team, and they've asked us this question. So the next stage is we're going to get together and kind of synchronise ourselves, and this process we just called sort of yoiking, really, which comes from the Sami tradition. But after hearing Jerome's stories about the Bengeli and how when they are singing rituals they often have physical contact, this felt quite apt in that sense. It's a way to synchronise ourselves, really. Finding one note, really, out of all our separate notes.
Are these bureaucrats at City Hall?
These two people here. Yeah.
a load of different coloured marbles, like marbles.
But he was a sign of it.
There was so much fun.
So they were just recounting together what they'd seen on their journeys, and the journey was probably about 20 minutes long, and for some of them it was incredibly intense. We did over the week. We did lots and lots of these things, and I was utterly surprised how. Well, not utterly surprised, but for some of them I was very surprised, considering how they weren't that sort of conversant with their own imaginations. By the end of the week, how far they were in that world, to the point where I'd actually have to physically bring some of them back, actually touch them and say, come back now. They almost couldn't hear me talking. They were so far gone. So that was amazing. But then we had to actually give an account of that journey and find a moment of significance or relevance for the client. So this is Celeste and the answer she came up with here.
Okay, Celeste.
Okay, the significant part of my journey was when I became a student, or 3 students. I was given like a logarithm or some sort of formula, and I knew how to do it, but I didn't know how to apply it. And then I was another student given the same maths problem, and I knew how to use it and apply it. And then the third time, I was taught the formula and told how I can apply it and given the space to use it and in different possibilities. I felt empowered, and I felt I could choose what I wanted to do with that at any given time.
So that was just one. They all had significant moments. They all talked about. Some were incredibly obscure and difficult to grasp, and some were incredibly pragmatic like that, where it seems very obvious what the answer was to their question is why do people do bad things that are bad for their health, and why they can't do anything about that. So that was almost like a sort of quite a practical solution Celeste came up with for them there. And I think the bureaucrats really found it incredibly helpful. Not that we came up with answers necessarily that they'd never thought of before, but they actually saw someone experiencing coming up with that answer for themselves. They saw it coming from themselves. It was like this was an answer coming from knowledge from within them. So that it gave them a huge amount of trust in their answers, I think, and an integrity to that, which was quite important, I think. So I just want to go off on a little tack now to show you something else a little bit different before we end in 5 minutes. Alongside this almost sort of shamanic practice, this fascination with becoming animal and crossing over into this otherness has continues to fascinate me. And I suppose it comes from this idea, which I feel is very polarised in our society. This idea that our separation from animal is either very extreme, as human and as animal, or it's incredibly muddled. So we're kind of given two very opposing positions. One's very scientific, and the other one's incredibly romantic and sentimental. And it feels like neither of them serve us that well in terms of our worldview. So a lot of my inquiry, I suppose, and investigation and correspondence with nature is about trying to unveil some sense of relationship that gives us a new insight into how we could form different sorts of relationships. So this is a piece I made called Dawn Chorus. And I went out with a wildlife sound recordist and recorded the birdsong Dawn Chorus in a woodland in northern England. And I put out 14 microphones and tried to record 14 birds individually at the same time. And we slept in this camper van and we woke up every morning at 3 o'clock and just recorded all these birds and had to work out where they're all singing from in the dark. It was amazing. And I worked with this guy called Jeff Sample, who's a world-renowned wildlife sound recordist. And we took all those sound recordings back to his studio and slowed them down about 16 times. So where you'd normally hear a bird roughly like that, slowed down it would sound like very roughly. But that was like a blackbird, for example. All the birds would obviously sound very different. So I slowed them down about 16 times, it depended. And then I went down to Bristol and I ran auditions in local choirs, mainly amateur choirs. And I said, would you like to sing like a bird? And I asked people to try and copy this slowed down bird song. And it's not that hard to copy, but for singers it seems quite hard because they're used to doing singing pure tones on a scale that they know. And this sound, this slowed down bird song is like a early music. It's like the first music. There's no scale, there's no semitone, there's no pure tone. It's all noise and it's strange intonation, but still there's phrasing and rhythm and musicality there. It's very interesting. So I got about 19 people to learn this bird song, roughly, and then I got them to sit in their own habitats with a little earpiece, and they copied it. So they sang along with it for 2 hours, this slowed down bird song. So they almost went into this trance of this strange sound. It was very, very odd, and I filmed them doing that. And then I sped the film up 16 times. So whereas they were singing the slowed down 16 times, then I sped their voice up 16 times. And the result was very, very accurate birdsong. I mean, for some people, you wouldn't be able to know the difference. It was amazing. And then I had 14 screens in the gallery, video screens, replicating the 14 microphones in the woodland. And on each screen, you see a person, and they're singing their birdsong. And overall, it's an exact recreation of that morning dawn chorus. So not just the bird's song is very accurate, coming out of people's mouths, but the timings of the birds exactly as well. So it was a ridiculously over-the-top attempt to recreate this natural phenomena with humans. So I just made a little documentary about how I made it, and this is filming a guy called David Rothenberg, who some of you might know, the musician and author, and he was a song thrush. Not all the singers came from Bristol. He sort of volunteered. Well, he was very interested in it, and I said, well, if you can come and film it if you agree to do it in your underpants. So.
Where should I look? What's the best? Wherever you want. Except from the back. So around the lights over there. There's no screen, no camera. There's two cameras, neither camera.
You do this, be quite introspective.
Right.
You know.
Nobody's watching you.
Pick.
Because nobody's watching you.
No one's watching you. No one's talked to you for days.
I'm not being filmed.
Basically recluse in this hotel room.
Right.
The management starts to worry. There's a smell emanating.
He's in a hotel room, which is his natural habitat. He spends a lot of time in hotel rooms.
Gone out.
Just waiting like, there should be a few pizza boxes in there. Right, so empty bottles of whiskey.
Whiskey around the corner, right?
This is the practice. So you hear the slowed down bird song and him copying it.
There are moments I find myself, and I'm sure most people do, it's usually in the shower or maybe just sitting on my own, like maybe you are now on the edge of your bed, Rose, and you hum to yourself, or you find yourself singing a song, and it just comes in and it just comes out. It's almost like a reflex, almost.
Yeah.
And that quite interests me, and that feels like it's there's no function there. There's no point to that song. It is just the fact that you are breathing and you are, I don't know, there's something very innate about that, the need to sing or the need to make some kind of some melody maybe.
Well, certain species of birds do the same things. Like the blue jay in the United States, they've been known to sing when they're asleep,
Really?
along with their dreams. They make any number of odd little mumbling sounds, and I think many bird species have been noticed singing at times when they're not necessarily supposed to, when no one else is listening, when they've already mated, when territories are defended. The singing is going on much more than the functions that are supposed to be established by them. If one could get inside the consciousness of a bird, as the bird is singing, it's just singing. That's what comes first for the bird. They're not thinking, oh, I've got to attract a mate now, or oh, here, I've got to fight. The singing, I think, comes first from the point of view of the bird. And I don't think it's an impossible question to figure out what it's like inside the mind of a bird. We've been told by philosophers, we'll never know what it's like to be a bat or a bird or anything else, but from this experience of singing, I think I'm beginning to get a sense of what it might be like to be a song thrush.
So you have to imagine there's 14 of those people singing at the same time. It's quite a din. But there was something about their actions as well, which became quite bird-like, which was lovely. Okay, I think that's it. Any questions? Quick, no? Break.